It is 5:34 at KPEL, Go Acadiana, with Ken Romero and Dr. John. And Dr. John, I'm privileged to introduce you to a friend of mine, Dr. Gerd Wuestemann, who is actually a musical doctor.
Hey, listen,
Right.
We're always glad to increase the intellectual capacity of this show. So, Gerd, welcome to the show.
John's implying we could have a couple of homeless people come in and it would increase the intellectual status of the show.
Capacity, yeah, between the three of us for sure, yeah.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't mean. All right, so you may ask why I've got Gerd Wuestemann on. Gerd is the director of Acadiana Center for the Arts, and he and I talk quite a bit about politics and stuff. And Gerd, if you cannot tell by his accent, is originally from Germany. And German politics, I don't know if you could call it contact sports like in St. Martin Parish, but it's like everybody in Germany goes to vote, correct?
Yeah, one of the greatest frustrations. I mean, this Saturday was an important election for this entire state, and it was a very important election for us locally. And the fact that our voter turnout is below not only 50 but below 40%, I think that's something that goes to show that I really think the right to vote is actually a privilege, and it should be a mandate for people. In Germany, it's a national shame if we're below 85% in voter turnout.
Wow.
So we take voting very, very seriously, and I think it's a bit of a sign that maybe we have to look at our democratic system and admit that something's a little bit broken. We're not really connecting to our populace anymore, and that's a big issue, I think.
Yeah, and John and I have talked about the fact that in other countries it's so difficult to vote. You see people, walking 100 miles for a week or something to get to some little place where they get their thumbs stamped. And here we make it easy. You can vote 2 weeks ahead of time, and we have extended hours, and it just seems like the easier we make it, the fewer people we get.
Yeah, I don't think access is the issue. I think education is the issue, right? I think we need to make sure that people still believe that the system works. I mean, we all know democracy is flawed. We all have various issues with whatever's happening, but it's still the best thing available to us. I don't think any of us want to go back to royalty, right? And I'm sure none of us want to go back to communism or socialism. So if this is where we are, if this is the spectrum we find us in, then we should also take the next logical step and say, I mean, if my voice does have some level of value, then I want to make sure it's being heard. And so I really think we should do that. I mean, it's actually remarkable that, even on a national level, every 4 years we basically overthrow our government without ever any shots fired by exercising our right to vote. And I think that's an incredible privilege. So if
it's
you think
interesting
about that,
there when you look at, say, where the U.S. is relative to other countries in terms of voting. Typically, Belgium, Turkey, and Sweden lead the world in terms of turnout. They're in the upper 80s. Germany, by the way, in 2013, 66% actually turned out to vote. Now, I'll tell you this, and because everyone always says, well, what happened? Because a decade plus ago, 40 years ago now, the U.S.'s numbers were much higher. Today, we're behind Slovakia. Well, the reason we were much higher, you ready for this?
Okay.
The 26th Amendment. When the 26th Amendment was passed, now all of a sudden the voting age went from 21 to 18. And guess what? All of those people that were championing for the right to vote, because if I have to go to Vietnam, damn it, I ought to be able to vote and buy liquor and smoke dope. Well, guess what? They don't vote.
They're drinking and smoking dope, though.
And it dropped. Our average vote went from a little bit over 60% to less than 50% instantly. And we've never recovered when we've expanded suffrage to those who are 18 years old or older.
A couple of questions for Gerd. Gerd, how long have you been living here in Louisiana or in the U.S.?
I've been in the U.S. for about 23 years now, a long, long time. I came here on something like a Fulbright scholarship from the German government, do a postgraduate in New York at Juilliard School. Got another scholarship to do a second master's in San Francisco, did my doctorate in the U.S. I think a year in, I knew that I was probably not going to go back home because I just seemed to fit here, and built my career here in the country, basically. I came to Lafayette in 1998, took a professor position at the university here.
So what is the voting age in Germany?
It's 18 also.
So it's 18 also. Has it always been that way? Or
as long as I can remember, certainly, yeah. I believe it's been that. Pretty much 18 is pretty much our year of consent and privilege all across the board in Germany.
Now, if I remember correctly, you can buy liquor in Germany without being 18.
Legally, no, but I think that we are a lot more lenient, or used to be much more lenient about this. Nobody really would card you or check you. Now, at least for me growing up, that was an issue. And frankly, we didn't have significant underage drinking issues as far as I know and concerned.
Well, in Germany, when I was in Stuttgart, I was shocked to see vending machines selling beer and wine. They had no way of checking your ID, but you didn't see a bunch of drunk teenagers.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Sometimes it makes you wonder about the correlation between access and exercising sort of some sense, some common sense, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
John?
Yeah, it does require. Well, look, I mean, the American culture is one where we require less and less of our people. Personal responsibility has gone out the window, and the idea of a vending machine having beer or wine would just be an excuse to break into the local high school. So, but I wanted to get back to a couple of things, and I do agree with what Gerd was saying earlier about the reasons people vote or don't vote. Apathy, they're too busy. But a lot of people say that the difficulty of registering is a problem. And you can register when you get your license. You can register all sorts of ways. And it's amazing that prior to, motor voter, people registered literally at a higher number. So I think what it is just that people oftentimes do not participate because of sheer apathy.
Gerd, in Germany, how do you register to vote? Is it a thing where you've got to go to the registrar's office, or?
You do. It's a similar process. If anything, it's actually more cumbersome than I see in the U.S. You have to actually go through more steps, and I don't think that's a deterrent for people. I think you're right, John. I think apathy has a lot to do with it, and I think at least there's an in-between generation. I think the generation Xers and up, all the way to the millennials, I think that's a generation that seems to be really discouraged by the political process. And we deal a lot with young people in our business, and I think that's something that we see across the board. I think this new generation, the millennials and up, there seems to be a renewed interest, at least in some level of public service, and maybe in some level of really reshaping how the country works and how it's run. And let me tell you, I mean, even from my perspective, I think it is, my challenges are more with things like constitutional amendments when they're up for vote on an election like this, because you really have to do your homework to understand what's going on there. I do think that voters sometimes feel discouraged by the political process, but I think by and large apathy, I think, is probably the number one reason. Yeah.
You mentioned amendments, and John and I have talked about this before. In Germany, do they write amendments to, let's say, the Constitution that are so confusing when you vote yes, you're actually saying no, and when you vote no, you're actually saying yes?
Actually, this is an interesting question because our system really is set up very differently. The public does not vote on up or down on constitutional amendments at all during an election process. We really have a much greater sense of entrusting those decisions to the elected officials because we elect them to basically make those decisions in an educated fashion. And I think in our system, it also, because it's a parliamentary system that's set up very differently, right?
Sure.
There's much less power concentrated in the executive branch. There's more power actually in the legislative branch. And within that system also, we have a multi-party system. So there is actually a larger spectrum in which you as the voter can feel that you're somewhat represented.
Yeah.
Which presents its own set of problems, and I'm not advocating for one system or another. Also, I think that a country the size of the U.S., you can't readily compare what happens here to a small country like Germany.
Sure.
But I think those are all reasons why the electoral process is very different in Germany, and people feel probably a bit more engaged in the decision making at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's 5:42. Our guest is Gerd Wuestemann. We're talking about the electoral process here in the States and in his home country of Germany. He's been living in the U.S. for 23 years, as he says, so he's got a really good grasp of how our system works. Do you have this kind of talk on German radio where people are actually talking to, the voters or the constituents get to hear from the people running?
Actually, there are two national pastimes in Germany. The number one pastime is drinking beer. Well, then the number two might actually be soccer. That's a close toss, right? But the third big pastime in Germany is discussing politics. And I tell you, this is something that I find very interesting. I love talking politics with my friends and with colleagues. And we in Germany, it's typical that if you disagree on a point, you have a pretty fierce discussion about it, but it's totally okay. You're doing it as friends. And there's no reason that we, can't be friends and disagree over certain issues.
Sure.
and hate each other for it. I sometimes find that troubling here that when you get into political conversations, you have to be either on one side or the other. I actually really enjoy political discourse, and I also find it interesting because sometimes you might just have a chance in the discussion to change somebody's mind. And so I think we shouldn't shy away from honest political discussions. Somebody like me, for instance, I sit all over the spectrum because I'm in the arts business. I work with local politics all the time, and I think we build really great relationships here. And I have a lot of respect for everybody, even people that say on the city council never vote for what we are interested in seeing through. I have respect for their position, and I respect and value that they just see things differently. I think that should be okay.
John?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, what we've got now, and I think this has been sort of simmering in this country, at least for the last 20 years, is that we have such a partisan process, and we only have two parties. We have a multi-party system in Germany where, whatever you're interested in, there's a party for you. Here, unfortunately, people have sided up either Democrat or Republican, and oftentimes that means they can't be friends and sort of walk away from the political argument. They have to really take it. And our politics have become personal attacks. And those personal attacks means that we focus on issues that have nothing whatsoever to do with policy.
Yeah, I think in Gerd's home country, they have differences and they go out and drink beer together.
That's right. That helps, right? No, but I mean, John, to your point, I think that's a fabulous point, and I've never quite understood that. And the most interesting thing is I always felt that if politics works well in the U.S., it works well on a local level. And I think that we've often been exemplary in this community here in terms of how we handle our local politics. And I find I was a little distraught that in this particular race we've actually seen some of this some negative ads and so forth creeping into the process here, which I think is a relatively new thing for us, at least in recent years. In the last few decades, we haven't seen much of that, and I find that really unfortunate. I do think politics on a local level really works because if I screw up as the mayor or as a councilman, I have to live with that crap too for the rest of my days, right?
Yep.
And
that's right.
and I think that keeps us kind of honest and on the up and up, and I hope we can continue on that path because I think that's what makes Lafayette such a great community.
Gerd,
thank you so much.
Been
we
a pleasure
appreciate it,
having
Gerd.
you on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Great to have some views from the other side of the pond, as they say, John. It's just amazing. And Gerd being here 23 years, he's seen it from all sides.
Absolutely.
We will be right back and take a look at traffic.